Hello from the Walsh College Creator Lab. My name is Jay Krueger, and today I am in here with Dan Sem. And Dan is the Executive Director of the CIE, the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which is a new initiative here at Walsh College. So it was nice to get Dan in here. We're going to talk about a couple different things, but first, Dan, I want you to start off and give us an introduction of who you are and what your role is here at the college.
Great, and I'm so excited to be here, Jay. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
So I started in May of this year. Like you said, I'm the executive director. Yeah, brand new. Fresh in my honeymoon period. But I had been connected to your president, Susie Siegel, before because I worked at Concordia University where she was before.
Yeah.
I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm trained as a scientist. I started a biotech company many years ago, sold that to pharma. And ever since then, I've been helping people start companies. Most recently as a professor, as an administrator, and now at Walsh, running the CIE. So just kind of running boot camps and workshops and helping businesses and entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so. And it's a wonderful thing. So I also come out of that space, and that space of entrepreneurship and startups has a full different energy than anywhere else I've ever been. It is an exciting space. It's terrifying and wonderful all at the same time. And it's so exciting. So I am so happy that Walsh is doing something like this because I do think that our students also have a different perspective on business than most.
Oh, yeah.
We come in with an ability to look at things from a standpoint of what does business look like in the future and how do I get myself in a role to make those changes for the future. So it's a great thing that we are really getting involved with. So tell me about the Walsh CIE. Now, this is a new initiative. You've been brought in to really run this program. Tell me what that is.
Sure. Yeah. And I love doing it at Walsh, too, because of the history with Mervyn Walsh, your founder.
Absolutely.
Mervyn was the accountant for Thomas Edison, as folks that listen probably have heard like 100 times.
Oh, yeah. But it's like our favorite stat. It's such a cool thing. And I do think it feeds so much into who Walsh is today. Is when you're founded on the basis of innovation, it just makes sense.
I mean, I like to say, and I know President Siegel likes to say, we've been helping entrepreneurs and innovators since Mervyn Walsh and Thomas Edison.
Absolutely.
And so a focus of Walsh has always been applied education. So it's not sort of in an ivory tower. It's out there with business practitioners doing it. And so that will be the focus here as well. And before I came here, I ran something at another university that was similar to this. And we had an angel group of investors that invested about $1 million in 8 different companies connected to the university. And I'm going to do that for Walsh, with Walsh at a bigger level, involving our students and our alumni in the startup business process as well as established businesses. And we have such a rich alumni network of graduates in business. Maybe they want to start businesses, so we could maybe help them or involve them in other startups. So we'll have a whole bunch of programming in the fall. We got a large grant from SBAM, Small Business Administration of Michigan, to create 20 or so different boot camps and workshops. And we have a lawyer in residence, and we got a maker space, and we've got tools and resources for businesses like neuromarketing, if you want to sort of bring technology into marketing. All kinds of great stuff.
For sure. Now, can you tell me a little bit more about the grant? Because that was a really cool thing. Yeah. That was a huge piece, and I think it's really a kickoff for what it is to come. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and that grant is something we're going to use actually to build up the CIE to support. The grant itself is focused on established businesses that are, less than 50 employees, but more than a startup. So the CIE is focused on startups, but also kind of established small businesses, and that's what this grant is. And it's to provide resources, workshops, boot camps that are really practically useful for businesses over the next 2 years. So we've got about 20 or 30 programs. And like I said, we'll have a lawyer in residence. So if you're wondering sort of legal issues, I think maybe in a little bit, we're going to talk about some legal issues for startups. You'll be able to talk to our lawyer in residence. If you want to use the neuromarketing or focus group or even the space that we're in right now to do marketing materials for your business, we have grants to offer you that as well.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And that's something that is kind of the hope for this space. So the Walsh College Creator Lab, it came together in March. We just opened this up in March, and we've done so many interviews in here. And one of the great things that I've discovered is a lot of times I have the opportunity to sit here with people like yourself who are just so full of incredible knowledge, and they're so forward with what they have to offer, and they're so willing to give that. What I've discovered is that Walsh community is powerful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, and just in not even necessarily our students and alumni who are amazing people, but even outside of that, people see what Walsh is doing and they want to be part of it. And it's really fun to get some people in here that want to talk about that and they want to share their knowledge. So my hope is that we can start bringing in some of the entrepreneurs and talk about what they're doing.
Yeah.
And we can go through what are the trials and tribulations of this? What is the what is the things you've gone through and what can you help the next person with?
Yeah.
And I think that entrepreneurial space is such a fun one for that reason, is that people are willing to give that knowledge ahead of time.
I mean, since I've been here, I've been talking to people in the community at Invest Detroit, Renaissance Ventures, Bamboo Labs, all over the community. And the Walsh brand is so strong in the community because we have graduates everywhere, and especially in sort of the business and finance world. I think it seems to me a majority of CFOs and business accountant type folks in the businesses in the Detroit and Troy area are Walsh graduates. And that's a great reason. In fact, one kind of neat story that surprised me is I'm working with somebody to set up an event at the Detroit Federal Reserve in mid-November. The Federal Reserve publishes this thing called the Beige Book, and it gives businesses sort of a forward-looking, what's the economy going to be like. So we're going to do that as one of our workshops that folks are interested. Well, welcome to come to. And I discovered that, there's an advisory council for the Detroit Federal Reserve that is essentially Walsh alumni. So we'll be sharing with businesses.
That's pretty cool. That's what a feather in the cap of like, look, we're not just talking it. Yeah. We're around here. We tout the fact that we work on hands-on things. Right. When you come in here, I mean, we joke about it all the time, but like, we are different from day one. Yeah. Even our accreditation is different. We don't operate on theory. We operate on application. Right. And that is, talk about an entrepreneurial spirit. Like that's where it comes from is everything you do, you can immediately take it out into your place of work or your company that you're starting and immediately put it into practice.
That is totally my mantra. I mean, I was a dean of business and I don't have a PhD in business.
Yeah.
I raised $20 million in venture capital and sold the company to Novartis. So that's my degree. I did it.
Yeah, exactly. And it carries so much more weight. And it's, it's hard when you're in the seat of academics to be like, entrepreneurs a lot of times don't see academics as a necessary thing.
Yeah.
But they're showing it. They're showing that they can do it. And in a lot of ways, those are the people you want teaching it.
Yeah.
Because if we can combine the little bit of theory with all of the application, everybody's gonna be better for it. So I think it's incredible. And I'm excited to see what the CIE has to do in the coming years, because I think there's some really exciting stuff coming, and I'm so happy you're here to be part of that.
So good to be here.
Yeah. So now let's dive into some of the stuff that's going on in the industry. So I think one of the biggest things that's happening right now is this Chevron precedent.
Yes.
So let's start off a little bit and explain what that is to somebody that has no idea. They've never heard of this before.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about what is the Chevron precedent.
Yeah, and I love legal stuff. Part of my midlife crisis was I got a law degree, so I'm an entrepreneur.
That's a incredible midlife. It's a little different than buying a convertible.
I should have got a convertible, actually. But no, so I love sort of how legal precedent affects businesses, and this is a big one for sure.
For sure,
one of the biggest I think we've seen in a while. So the Chevron case, I think it was back in 1984. Was a Supreme Court case about how much power should be given to regulatory agencies. And so it was Chevron, the Natural Resources Defense Council. So it was about some pollution-related matters, for example, involving the EPA.
Right.
And what that case decided was that interpreting the law or the regulations, in doing so, a lot of deference should be given to the regulatory agencies. And so that essentially gives a lot of power to the regulatory agencies, which, many people would argue is good because they're more knowledgeable about environmental issues or healthcare issues or food safety issues. Other people might argue, no, that's too much power. And actually, some have argued we've essentially created a fourth branch of government with regulatory agencies.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that the number of regulatory agencies has exploded. It's almost exponential.
For sure.
And in terms of the new regulations. So, regulations can be stifling for businesses, but they also do serve a purpose of protecting the public in certain ways. So there's a balance.
Yes.
And that balance is shifting dramatically right now.
Okay. And so tell me then what happened recently with the Chevron precedent.
Yeah, so there's a Supreme Court case that was decided recently this summer, the Loper case, that essentially overturned Chevron.
Okay.
And the way law works, by the way, is there are written laws that are statutes, but those are never very clear. They were written by congressmen and congresswomen, and the courts actually interpret what those laws mean.
Okay.
And what the courts have said, like I said before with Chevron, is let's defer to the administrative agency. Let's ask the Food and Drug Administration, about food safety. Let's ask the EPA and defer to them. What the court said this summer was no, we are empowering them too much. We should not give this deference to the administrative agencies anymore. That was wrong. That was an inappropriate delegation of power.
Okay.
So now the regulatory agencies, and I mean, there are regulatory agencies everywhere.
Right.
Department of Education for schools, food and drug.
There's something that oversees everything.
Yeah. Even the IRS,
right,
or the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. I mean, there's hundreds, probably thousands. They have now just been disempowered, so they're not going to be able to interpret the rules that they're enforcing. And if you think about what a regulatory agency is, there are three branches of government, right? Mm-hmm. So a regulatory agency actually has all three branches within it. So they make up what they call rules, which are kind of like laws. Mm-hmm. And then they also interpret those rules. So they have administrative law judges, that work for the Food and Drug Administration or the IRS or whatever.
Okay.
And then they also enforce them. So if you've ever seen the perp walk when Bernie Madoff gets arrested, or Martha Stewart. So Martha Stewart's a more likable person than Bernie. You see them getting arrested by, say, the Securities and Exchange Commission. So they have their own enforcement. So they have all three branches of government in the agency. A lot of people have questioned whether that's appropriate. It's almost like a fourth branch of government. Right. And so what the Supreme Court this summer said is, interpreting the law will not be done by the agency. It'll be done by the courts.
Okay.
And some people might say, well, that's the idea. We have three branches of government. We shouldn't have everything under what is effectively the executive branch, because the regulatory agencies are under the president. So this gives regulatory agencies give presidents a lot of power, because the agency is under the executive branch of government.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, before we get too far away from this, one of the questions that I bring up in my one of the classes I teach is a marketing class, and one of the questions that comes up often is around regulatory pieces.
Right.
In your opinion, as we look at the different regulatory pieces and what they oversee, and some of the, you had mentioned that there's some stifling moments when regulation is overseen too much.
Right.
When it comes to innovation and entrepreneurship, and then you look at the regulations, where do you think it falls in the way of, does it stifle some of the companies from being more innovative because they know that they have to fall underneath these regulatory rules?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt it stifles. The question, though, and you got to balance that against the fact that we do need oversight and guardrails to protect the public.
For sure. Absolutely. So, but I think about, I think one of the most obvious cases recently has been these billionaires that are like, I want to go to space because I'm bored. And, and so, but there was, in a lot of ways, they just went, I'm going to go do that.
Yeah.
And maybe there was some regulation in there. Maybe there wasn't as much as there should be. But in the other side of that, they came up with some innovative ways to do things that have never been done before.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So when it comes to smaller businesses, if Joe Schmo down the street wants to start a business, what kind of regulations are coming in that are maybe not allowing him to get innovative in whatever the business is that he's doing?
Yeah.
And do you think that plays a bigger role in people getting excited about innovation in the entrepreneur space?
Yeah, well, in terms of the billionaire entrepreneur like Elon Musk, I know that he always had a procedure where if there was a rule within the company, a specification, and obviously space is highly regulated.
For sure.
He would say, I want to know who made up the rule, why did they make it, where did it come from?
Okay.
Innovators are not dogmatic people. They don't just follow rules. They want to know where the rules came from.
Yeah.
And, now the U.S. government is actually contracting with Musk to take people to the space station because he can do it much more cheaply and safely. So I think to innovate, you need to be able to kind of break rules.
For sure.
And certainly I come from the healthcare world. So
I was just going to say, and that was my next one was,
super highly regulated.
Big time regulated, but there's also private companies now coming in and being like, well, look, let's try this another way.
Yeah.
And they're willing to put their money in and see what they can do.
Well, for Main Street businesses, I mean, it could be restaurants, food safety regulations,
right.
OSHA, most companies are needing to be compliant with safety regulations for their employees, which are reasonable. They should be there. But are there times when things are, mandated without being well thought through? And in healthcare, that's totally true.
Yeah.
You know, physicians and nurse practitioners are essentially restricted in what they can do and what they can't do. They just need to follow procedures that are dictated from, say, the Department of Health and Human Services or the Food and Drug Administration, whether or not those procedures make sense or not. And the procedures that are coming from the administrative agency, they usually make sense because they were developed by people that are knowledgeable.
Yes.
But they were done years ago.
Yeah, they were done so long ago.
Regularly, and situations are highly variable. So if you can empower people to have a little bit of freedom more, then that's helpful. But for pharmaceuticals, my world, you know, it's on average $1 billion to take a drug to market through clinical trials. That is all to satisfy the FDA requirements, which are fine. We want to be safe.
For sure.
But have we gone too far?
Right. But are we stopping things that they could be done?
Now we can't develop drugs for small populations of people because there's no point in making funding. A drug unless you can make at least $1 billion.
Exactly. Because you got to cover your cost. That's an interesting one. Okay, so I don't want to get too far away from the Chevron stuff because I think there's still a lot of pieces in there that we need to cover. So talk to me about the clarity of rules and regulations now, because I think one of the things is, you know, change is good, but change also brings a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So before, people at least knew what they were in for, and now that things have changed, what is the impact of the clarity now that that's been wiped out this summer?
My sense is, and I'm only speaking in terms of the impact on businesses.
For sure.
Public safety is a whole nother issue and a super important issue. But in terms of the impact on businesses, I think longer term, it'll be positive. Shorter term, there's uncertainty because we don't exactly know how rules are going to be interpreted. They're going to be interpreted by the courts. And so courts are not going to defer to the agencies anymore as of now.
Okay.
But having said that, the courts are still going to listen to the experts. So they're going to listen to the top scientists or whatever is relevant for the area. And a lot of it, too, is maybe EPA regulations with pollutants from businesses. How to interpret whether somebody's violated or not. You know, that's not going to be under the agency now. It's going to be, you know, if it gets litigated, it's going to go to the court and the court decides. So that's So I think in the end, what that's probably going to mean is agencies are going to be pushing forward less regulations because they're going to be less empowered to actually, you know, be determining what those regulations mean. So there will probably be a lightening of regulations on businesses. But the trouble is, right now, we don't know what that's going to look like. And I think the uncertainty is going to be a little bit of a challenge for business. Longer term, it'll probably be positive. And in the world of startups where people are trying to raise money, if you're in an industry that's regulated, investors want to, that's like one of the main things they want to know after how much money am I going to make and when. Is what's your regulatory path if you're in a regulatory agency? How are you ensuring you're compliant? And right now there's a little bit of uncertainty. So I think for the next year, it might be kind of shaky ground because we don't know what the landscape is. But longer term, there will probably be less onerous regulations on businesses. And I think that'll be positive, but we can't overshoot in a way where businesses are so empowered that there's danger to the public.
Do you think that there's any fear at that point of when there's not as much regulation? Do you think there's any fear of monopolization because of somebody being able to invent whatever they want and run away with it? Do you think there is any fear in that, in not even just that piece, but any additional fears that could come out of this?
Yeah, I mean, and with regard to the specific word monopolization, the Federal Trade Commission is one of the regulatory agencies. And when you talk about companies even kind of merging, the FTC decides if that's allowed or not. So if there's ambiguity in that law, it'll just go to the courts. So I don't know. I mean, it's really, the point is it's going to be determined by the courts. And so I don't know that it'll be worse in any way necessarily.
That's good.
And in terms of those, like antitrust issues, those probably are usually determined by the court anyway. So when push comes to shove, I think.
So let's look at the positive thing. Let's forecast out a little bit. What are some of the great things that can happen because of this?
Yeah, I think when you're in a highly regulated industry where the regulations are a little bit unclear, I think you will have longer term. You'll have less uncertainty, and you'll be able to be more nimble and innovate more. You know, one industry that I'm follow very much is the nutraceutical industry, which is always kind of worried about, you know, the FDA looking over its back. So maybe they'll be a little bit more nimble. I think when the court does weigh in, then that is precedent that usually is fairly reliable. And so I think it'll lead to more clarity for businesses in the long run and maybe less stifling regulation after we get past this next couple of years or so. And that's especially true in highly regulated industries like the finance industry, like education, like healthcare, food, hospitality, chemical industries, things like that.
So that actually kind of starts to answer my next question, which is who is the most affected by this change?
Yeah, all of those kind of regulated industries, which is almost everybody. I mean, everything from the main street businesses of restaurants and hospitality to startups and entrepreneurs and for sure sort of healthcare and education are two of the most highly regulated. Two industries I've been in.
For sure.
Suffered under that regulation, but also see the need for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, do you think that it's going to be a lot? How much do you think that the small startup company versus the existing large company, how much do you think this will impact each of those?
I think, I think the small startup company in the Elon Muskian kind of way can be a little bit more nimble. Startup entrepreneurs, by their very nature, are kind of bold and a little risk averse.
For sure.
And not risk averse, rather. But so maybe they won't be bothered by the fact that we're in flux right now, because I think they might be in a better position. The place where it'll hurt startups is investors don't like uncertainty. And so if the investors aren't sure what the regulatory path is, they may hold off on investments in companies that are in areas that are highly regulated. So they're going to want to have almost like legal opinions or maybe a regulatory expert weigh in to put the investor's mind at ease.
Okay. So, I mean, if we're talking about something where the regulation piece of it is going away, why are investors concerned about what the regulatory path is if there doesn't really seem to be one?
If I look at my industry, the pharmaceutical industry, you're talking about something that's going to be a huge investment of money. And if the FDA is going to change the rules on you because of a court ruling, something that you were going to be able to take to market, you might not be able to. One example, a concrete example of that in the pharmaceutical world is it used to be a couple of years ago that if you had a diagnostic test, you didn't need to go through this huge regulatory approval process. You could do the test in what's called a CLIA certified lab, in a hospital lab, without getting that, $2 million approval. Now the courts or rather the agencies have weighed in and said, no longer can you do that. Now you need to go through what's called a 510K approval process, which is probably going to be at least a couple $1 million to do a diagnostic test. So that was a really concrete impact on startup businesses that do diagnostics. And it all came from a regulatory agency, not a court.
Okay.
And you could say, is it really appropriate that one branch of government should do all of this?
Right.
Shouldn't we have kind of checks and balances? So,
right. Yeah. For sure. So, okay. So that makes sense then. So it's not necessarily that there's no regulation. It's just a very different type of regulation, because you're still going to have overseeing organizations that are going to approve or disapprove, and they're going to let things go.
For the sky is falling folks that are saying no regulations, I'm like, no, that's not true.
It's not true.
It's just the arbiter of what the rules are is no longer all within one organization. It's now another branch of government. So,
right.
Which, our founders seem to think it was nice to have three branches of government.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay. So then as we wrap up then, I would imagine that there's going to be a gajillion questions that people have as this comes around. So if I'm an entrepreneur that's out there and I'm trying to start a company, and especially, let's say in the fintech space, there's regulations, but now that's just changed. Where am I going for questions?
Yeah, I think, and if you're a small business, maybe this is harder to afford, but you probably should consult some sort of regulatory expert. Most law firms have regulatory experts. We, as I told you, with the CIE, with the SBAM Foundation grant, we have a lawyer in residence who can probably field kind of Main Street regulatory questions. And we actually have a FDA, former FDA person that can help with healthcare regulatory questions. But yeah, I think if the regulatory landscape is important to your business's success, then I think probably you should talk to a consultant of some sort, somebody who's got regulatory expertise, compliance expertise. That, you don't have that in a small business with less than 20 employees.
No. You don't have the money to keep those people on hand.
Contract with somebody.
For sure.
And maybe a first step could be the regulated consultant that we have through the through the SBAM Foundation grant.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, Dan, I really appreciate it. I'm really excited to see how the CIE goes. Yeah. I'm excited to look at the next handful of months, years, and see where things go from here. But I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge on the Chevron stuff. I think that's really important stuff, especially for those who are in the industry of being regulated and now having lots of questions. So hopefully we at least answered a handful of those in there and at least gave them some grounds to go find the right people to answer some more detailed questions. So Absolutely. I appreciate it, Dan. That was great.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.